Vic Johnson, welcome to the Running Lawn podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Nice to see you, Mountain Sport Dietitian.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah, well, so like as the name tells us, you help mountain athletes perform better with nutrition and hydration and like fueling and all of that. So, yeah, before we get into the specifics of today's conversation, just give us a presentation of who you are and what you do and also where you're based right now, because it's pretty
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, so we're currently in Thailand right now. We're doing a kind of a year of travel, and we were just talking before the recording that, we're in Chiang Mai, great trails here, some fun races, and so it's been exciting. Lots of humidity, so challenging my hydration strategies here, which is good. But yeah, so I'm a sports dietitian. I work predominantly with mountain or endurance athletes who are doing cool stuff in the mountains. So I would say most of my athletes are trail and ultra runners, but I work a lot with cyclists and triathletes and ski mountaineers, climbers, really anyone who's having fun in the mountains. I help them with their day-to-day fueling and their intra-sport fueling and hydration, and whether that's training or racing or both. So I love it. Super fun to work with that crowd.
Yeah, super fun. I was just thinking, is there any big difference in terms of the approach that you use with different endurance athletes like triathletes or trail runners or I don't know, track marathoners.
Yeah, yeah, for
You know,
sure.
I think like the principle of nutrition are, of course, the same, but then how you decline them in the actual nutrition plan on a day-to-day basis and on the actual race is maybe a little different.
Yeah, for sure. You're absolutely right. I think the general principles are pretty applicable to any sort of, honestly, bigger picture, any sport.
Yeah,
And then especially endurance sports, they're all pretty similar with the needs, but how you're getting that nutrition in is going to change depending on the sport. For example, when I'm working with a long course gravel rider
yeah,
who's doing, these 100+ mile races. They're out there for a long time. They might not even be wearing like a vest like we would in ultra running. And so the way that they're going to get in most of their carbs or their nutrition is usually going to be fluid carbs, right? And they're doing that through bottles. And so practicing that in training and making sure they're optimizing what they're getting. So yeah, we're winter athletes, right? Like that can be really challenging to fuel when you've got all these layers on and that sort of thing. And so figuring out what works for the specific athlete within their sport is a crucial part of what we do.
yeah, yeah. We were discussing just before the conversation how, again, the principle of sports nutrition are relatively simple, but where people tend to mess up is when they apply them to their training and life, because I think the tricky part here is to understand when a certain behavior or strategy works depending on the
Hmm.
situation you're in. So where do you see most athletes struggle or like mess up with their daily nutrition or also like their race day nutrition? Like,
Yeah,
what are
that's
some most common
uh,
mistakes? So we can maybe
yeah,
start the conversation from there.
yeah. I think daily nutrition, the biggest one that I see is people just not eating enough food in
Yeah.
general. A lot. That's a challenge for a lot of endurance athletes because the calorie output is so high and it can be challenging to eat enough to match that output. And so helping athletes do that, it's one thing to say, oh, well, you just need to eat more, right? And it's like, well, okay, so how do I actually like go and do that? Like, how am I actually going to apply that? So whether that comes down to like meal planning and helping an athlete like do some meal planning, or if it's just like, hey, we need to send you a text reminder every week and say, have you done your grocery shopping this week? Like, just do you have food in your house to eat? Because that's honestly that like that barrier is a big barrier for some people. Um, so yeah, eating enough is one thing. And then once an athlete's eating enough, then we can start focusing on more specific nutrients like in their day to day. Maybe we'll do some blood work and find out that they're low in vitamin D intake and then figure out logistics of, okay, what foods are we going to add or supplements are we going to add to your routine to make sure you can hit those. And usually there's a couple of key micronutrients that our mountain athlete demographic tends to be low in and lots of times that is vitamin D or iron or B12. Those are some areas of focus that I would definitely hit when we're kind of going through their nutrition. Um, so that's kind of the day-to-day stuff. When we look at intra-sport fueling, so maybe that contains like the before training, before racing, during training, during racing, and then like recovery nutrition after sessions. Um, I think a lot of times it's hard for athletes to like they'll read something online or they'll hear something from another athlete on Instagram or it's like okay I'm fueling with this much they listen to a podcast interview with
Yeah.
Tom Evans or whatever and it's like okay well he's doing 120 grams an hour so I've got to do 120 grams an hour right
Yeah, like
and
discerning the information, and just like in training,
yes
you read something online from a coach or from a pro athlete, and you want to apply it to your own training without understanding the context and where that information comes from. So, yeah, unless we have a
exactly
like a background, a knowledge of the topic, we shouldn't be like cherry picking our
yeah, and it's hard
information
not, I
online.
mean, it's hard not to do that, right? Like I
Yeah,
don't blame athletes for hearing one of the best talk about what they do and then being like, okay, so I'm gonna go do that, right? And sometimes that works.
yeah,
But
for
yeah,
sure.
without understanding that context and like at least a basic understanding of the physiology and what's happening there, it's really hard to apply those principles. And so that is a mistake that I see athletes do a lot with kind of just taking information online and just applying it without really fully understanding why they're doing it. Um, Another big reason why a lot of athletes come to work with me in my one-on-one coaching is um, GI issues, right? Whether that's nausea or vomiting or diarrhea or just upset stomach while you're in your sport. And I find that the longer the sport is or the longer the event is, the more those types of um, issues pop up. And so that's something that a lot of athletes struggle with is knowing the timing and the amount and how to troubleshoot some of those issues too.
Nice. So that's already a lot of stuff that we could discuss. So four main
Yeah.
areas, basically making sure we're eating enough and like under fueling, nutrients once we make sure we're eating enough, which is the number one thing, and then intersport fueling and GI issues as the fourth topic. So we're
Yeah.
gonna try to dive into each one of those topics, of course, without
Cool.
pretending to talk about everything, but at least maybe demystifying some common minds, or yeah, just giving some practical tips and information so that people can apply them to their own training. Of
I
course,
love it.
not. Yeah. Um, cool. So let's start from eating enough. That is a big thing because, like, I think many people are concerned about the opposite, like eating too much. And that's, of course, an issue for the majority of the population. But as endurance athletes who run a lot of miles and who want to maximize the benefits and the adaptation of training, eating enough is so important. Like, is yeah, the number one thing together with sleep, maybe. So how do we make sure we're eating enough? And I think this also has to do a lot with recovery. So what are some useful nutrition tips for recovery, from meal timing to meal composition and snacks and all of that?
For sure. Yeah. I think taking a good hard look at yourself and saying, okay, am I eating enough? How do I feel? And most endurance athletes are pretty tuned in, so they can feel if they're feeling low energy, or if if you have a bunch of workouts or runs in a row that don't feel good, that might be kind of like a check engine light of like, maybe we're not eating enough, right? So first realizing if you are eating enough or not. And that can be more subjective and kind of just go by feel if you want. You can also track your food and or keep a food journal or whatever and get a rough estimate. And those are never 100% accurate, but
Yeah.
get at least a rough idea of, am I eating enough to cover my energy expenditure, that, all these calories that I'm burning in my training.
Because for example,
And
like one of my concerns is that, like, what if I'm missing like 500 calorie on a day, and then the next day I eat like 300 more calories of what I need? Like, what does it matter?
does it
Like,
kind of
is
balance?
it the
Yeah.
overall balance on a long term, or like the daily balance,
Yes and yes. Um, for for most athletes, I would say, especially most male athletes, it you can pretty safely look at your overall balance on average over the course of several days or a week or something
Yeah.
like that, right? And in the normal fluctuations of, maybe you have a back-to-back long run weekend, right? And you're going to be burning a crazy amount of
Yeah,
calories
like
over
of
that
course you're
weekend.
gonna be underfueled for that day.
Exactly. And because you're probably skipping meals to be out there all day in the mountains, right? And so yeah, you're probably not going to eat enough for the amount that you burn those days. But then the next day is a rest day, and your appetite's probably going to soar because you're so hungry from all the work that you just put in. And so those two different times kind of balance each other out for the most part, right? Now there is some research to show that especially with female athletes, a within day deficit where you have a deficit on that day, like it can start changing things hormonally right away. And
Yeah, also
so
like it can impact your next session for sure
exactly,
because you're not gonna have
exactly.
enough energy to.
Yeah, you're not going to have the glycogen stored ready to go for that next, or you're still going to be sore from the last one
Mhm.
because you didn't get enough protein in and you're not recovering well and that sort of thing. So in general, I would say, yeah, let's like, if we were robots and you knew that you burned 3,000 calories, then it would be awesome if we could just be like, okay, I'm going to eat for sure 3,000 calories. And luckily, that's not actually how we are in real life,
Yeah, I
right?
mean
We have a
it's
little more
it's math,
fluidity.
but it's more complex than
Exactly.
just maths. Yeah.
Calories in, calories out. It is helpful, but it's like a helpful starting place, but it's not everything. Um,
Also,
but
yeah, sorry to interrupt
no,
you.
no, you're good, you're good.
I think there is also like this mental component where, on a day when you're burning a lot of calories and running a lot, you feel okay, but then the next day you maybe have a rest day, like in your example, and you feel a sense of shame for eating more than what you think you need, but
Yeah,
you actually need those calories. But
yeah,
it's
yeah.
sometimes it's hard for people to feel okay about, like, not feel guilty about eating more than what they usually do on a day when they are not training, for
100%.
example.
And that's one of the biggest things. I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of the biggest things that I try and help athletes change is, and they don't always need that, but a lot of times we feel like we are earning, like we have
Yeah.
to earn the calories that we can eat. Like I exercised this much, therefore I allow myself to eat this much, right? When really we should we should switch that. And we should say, I ate this much, so I'm able to exercise this much now, right? If I'm not eating enough, I don't deserve to
Yeah.
exercise, right?
Yeah.
And not that it has to be like that black and white, but kind of switching that mindset, I think is really helpful.
So helpful. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. So sorry for the interruption.
No,
But I,
no, you're
yeah,
totally
I
good.
think
That's
like
very
that's
relevant.
why it's not mere math, you know. It's not just like food nutrition has a social component, a cultural component. It's in, like involves our emotions. It's much
Oh
more than
yeah.
just fueling, you know. So
Oh yeah.
we need to take all those things into account when we approach the nutrition topic in sports.
100%. Because yeah, you can't, and that's why you can't just tell an athlete, oh, just eat more. Because
Yeah.
that might be a very deeply psychological problem for someone of like, oh, but I feel shame when I eat more, right? And it's like, okay, well, there's some deep inner work that needs to happen alongside kind of the more topical principles of like, okay, let's meal plan. Let's make sure you're eating 3 meals a day with snacks in between, right? Like a lot of times it is tied to these emotions and the psychology of our relationship with food and our body and sport. And it can be very messy at
Yeah,
times.
for sure. Okay, so I mean, first maybe is like get a sense of how we feel and like the energy levels and the energy trends in our normal training and really be honest with ourselves. Are we eating enough? And
Yeah.
then like a nutrition diary can help and all of that. And of course, seeking help from a professional, a nutritionist. Um, Once we have that dialed in, um, what are some useful nutrition tips that can help our training and recovery?
Yeah, for sure. So I usually try and help athletes identify gaps. And a gap might look like maybe you're normally driving to the trailhead to go on a run, right? And then maybe it takes you an hour to get home. Well, did you have any food in the car on your way home from that run? Did you have any hydration in the car? And lots of times, I would say most of the time, it's like, no, I was just going to eat dinner when I got home, which is definitely better than nothing, right? But we want to try to have that recovery nutrition ASAP. As soon as we're done with our exercise or our workout, we want to be getting in more carbs and protein and fluids, right? And so looking for those gaps, or maybe someone else's gap is, okay, I was at work and got really busy in between breakfast and lunch, and so I had a late lunch, and there's this 5 hour gap in between breakfast and lunch, and that's too long. That's too long of a gap to make up for. You can't just force down a bigger lunch and a bigger dinner. I mean, you can, but that's less convenient and harder to do. And so identifying those gaps in a normal schedule where you're kind of missing opportunities to eat is really helpful. Um, and then I always tell athletes like, okay, look for I call it like I should come up with a better name for this, but I just call it like the workout sandwich where you need to have kind of the pre, during, and post nutrition dialed, like regardless of whatever else is happening in throughout your day, like regardless of when you're eating breakfast or lunch or snacks or dinner, like you need to make sure where you have your main exercise of the day, you're making sure that you're starting fueled, you're fueling during, depending on the exercise, right? Sometimes we don't necessarily need to fuel during, but usually you're fueling before, you're fueling during, and then you're fueling right after. And so, kind of regardless of whatever else is happening in your day to day, that can be really helpful to kind of think about that and just simplify. And because there's so many moving parts and pieces, we'll never work on more than one thing at a time, right? It's like, okay, let's just focus on making sure before your runs, you're eating something. That might be half a banana, but like before your runs, you're eating something. And then once they kind of master that, it's like, okay, let's move on to the next thing, right?
Yeah, so like it's adding a little block each time, and
Exactly.
once you have that dialed in, you can work on the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Another question that I wanted to ask you related to this topic, like like basically eating enough, is related to weight because of
Mhm.
course power is a thing, like the power to weight ratio is a thing in trail running,
Yeah.
just like in
Yeah.
cycling and most endurance sports, like how many watts per kilos you're putting out. And of course, the higher the number, the better you're going to be able to push yourself, especially
Right.
on climbs.
Right.
But again, it's like pure math, but there is more than just math because sometimes I think like we focus too much on the weight side of the equation, and we think that if we drop a few pounds or kilos, we will get faster. And on paper, this works, but the counter consequences of maybe losing weight for a lot of athletes are far worse than the potential gains of this
For sure.
practice. So, like, of course, like underfueling and breads and poor recovery and bad training sessions. So, how do you see this situation, and like how would you approach the topic?
Yeah, it is a tricky one, and there are some dietitians or nutritionists out there that won't even talk about weight with their athletes. And I also feel like that can be harmful in and of itself sometimes, where sometimes sometimes some weight loss can be beneficial,
Yeah,
not only for performance, but for overall health, right? Like
yeah,
that can help someone's LDL cholesterols improve if they're losing body fat, for example. Most endurance athletes, especially at the tip of the spear, the best of the best, you, for example, weight loss isn't the thing that we want to focus on just because of those reasons that you brought up, where maybe even initially, let's say you lost, I don't know, 5 or 6 pounds or 2 or 3 kilos, right? Um, you might feel a difference at first, right? But almost always will come back to bite you if you're underfueling, right? If you're underfueling. Some of that weight loss might happen naturally just as someone heads into heavier volume training or something like that. Like sometimes there's small adjustments there and that can be okay. But long-term underfueling, whether that's several weeks or several months or several years, it almost always eventually leads to something like a big injury, like
yeah.
a stress fracture, lower leg injury, or you're constantly getting sick all the time, or your hormones are out of whack, or you're just plateaued in your training. Like you're feeling like you're training really hard, but you're not making the adaptations. And that's because your body doesn't have the building blocks to make those adaptations, right? Um, and
The
so
the hard thing is that like a lot of times, like I think it's a common experience for a lot of athletes. Like we plateau with our fitness and we want to work more and eat less because we think that's the solution. But it's
yeah.
actually like the opposite. So
Yes.
it ends up being worse than what it is already.
Yeah,
So
and you said something earlier that I think is so true. Like a lot of times we focus on that denominator, like if we're looking at like watts per kg, right? We focus on the kilograms side of that and be like, okay, well, I've got to weigh less, and if I keep my watts the same and I weigh less, I'm going to be more powerful and be faster, right? Um, and yes, on paper, maybe that's true, and sometimes that does play out, right? And if an athlete can healthily lose weight and needs to, that may be the case. Most athletes think that they need to lose weight and they don't actually need to lose weight though. So that comes back to that psychology piece of things too.
yeah, like how
But
do we convince ourselves that we don't need to lose
yeah,
weight?
yeah, and
I
that's
don't know.
really hard. A lot of times that's working on this body image and that's more like in the realm of like a therapist, honestly. And
Yeah.
there's a little bit of crossover with Like lots of times I'll talk about these things with my athletes too, but if it's really deep and persistent, then usually I'll recommend that they work with a therapist,
Yeah.
right? So there could, because there's so many, a lot of our self-worth is tied into whether that's like our performance or our body image or both, right? Like a lot of self-worth is tied into that. And so that can be, it can be tricky and take a long time to work through that. Um, but it's always worth it, right? It's always
Yeah.
worth coming out on the other end. But yeah, focusing on that numerator and saying, okay, what can I do to increase watts? And watts is literally it's power, right? And where does our body get power from? ATP, which is energy, which where does our energy come from? Food, right? And so, if you kind of work back through that equation a little bit, it's like that's way easier. Like if we're going to adjust one part of that equation, it's way easier to eat more
Make the
than manipulate your
numerator
body
bigger.
size, right? Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, yeah, that's kind of the approach that I like to use with my athletes for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for bringing this up because I think a lot of times, you know, and when I hear a discussion around nutrition is like the elephant in the room because
Yeah.
weight, of course, matters. But like, yeah, we sometimes people have a hard time talking about weight and all of that because again, it's not just numbers and science, but there is like an emotional, social
Yeah, it's deep.
component. So
Yeah.
yeah, there is a lot of crossover with psychology and mental health and all of those topics that we don't have time to dive in today. But
Another
yeah,
time.
super important for sure.
Yeah.
Um, cool. I think that was pretty much it. uh, Pretty much what I wanted to ask you about this first topic that I wanted to touch.
Great. Yeah.
Um, the second one is, of course, has been super popular. Is like the carbs revolution
Hmm.
in endurance sports because I think we've all seen a big shift in terms of how we approach fueling and nutrition in endurance sports over the last 3, 4 years. And we really see like athletes pushing the boundaries of how much calories or better carbs they eat during their activity to like 90, 100, 120 grams per hour. Um, so like as the science progresses, so does the nutrition like this the strategy that athletes actually use. And I wanted to ask you, why has there been such a big shift from like we used to take pride in like by how little we could eat on a
How-
long run or on a race. Like I
Yeah.
got away with like just one gel in 2 hours. And now it's the opposite. Like we take pride in um talking like talking about with our friends about like how much we were able to eat during the long run or the race that we just
Yeah.
did. So I think like
Yeah.
this shift in the narrative has been incredibly positive, both for
Yeah.
health and performance, but I'm not sure where it comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is really interesting because a lot of like the older athletes that I work with, I find especially in cycling, they'll still go on group rides and they'll be like, I have to like fuel secretly because if people see me fueling secretly, or if they see me fueling, they think I'm weak. And it's like, what? Like where is that coming from? But it's so true like that. I feel like that did kind of used to be like the ethos of
Yeah.
like endurance sports. It's like,
Oh
how
yeah.
little can I get away with, right? Um, and so yeah, luckily more and more people are realizing, oh, maybe that's not so helpful to think about it in that way. And we should be trying to do as much as we can, in within reason. But I think, I don't know if there's any one athlete or one coach or anything like that that kind of started that. I mean, the research has been there for years and years of like, okay, we know that again within reason, but the more carbs we can take on, the more ATP our body's going to be able to make from those carbs. Um, I think there has been some more recent years in how like in understanding how we digest those carbohydrate. Um, and without getting too complex, there's a concept called multiple transportable carbohydrate. And so if you're getting things from that come from glucose and fructose, those use two different transporters. And
Yes.
so theoretically, we can kind of maximize our carb intake if we're utilizing both. Um, but again, researchers have even known that for a while. And so I
Mhm.
think honestly, it's kind of a big, I think it's just a cultural shift, almost where athletes start trying this and they're like, oh, I feel better, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel better doing this. And maybe they're recovering better, their performance is better during the event. And then they'll tell their training partner or, the coach who has them doing that then starts doing that with their other athletes. And it just kind of, I think we're just kind of riding that wave of high carb fueling. And
Yeah.
then, one of my athletes will do really well at a race and then talk about it. Then I'll go on a podcast and I'll talk about it. And then so it's getting talked about more.
Yeah. It's become
And
very popular for sure, you know.
yeah, I think it's almost like other, whether that's like topical cooling or super shoes or whatever, like the more people are talking about it, the more people want to do more research about it. And so it's just kind of like this wave that keeps exponentially building, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Um, you mentioned why it's important not to only rely on glucose that generally comes in form of maltodextrins in energy gels or like yeah, just glucose.
Hmm.
But also fructose because the absorption at a gut level is limited and it basically goes through two different pathways to absorb
Hmm.
carbs. And you
Hmm.
can actually increase the amount of carbs you eat per hour um, that are actually useful for your energy metabolism by taking products that have both glucose
Both.
and fructose because I think like the absorption limit for glucose is around 60 grams per hour, but
Hmm.
with different compositions and ratios. Like, for example, several gels have a 2-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio or 1-to-1 or 1 to 0.8. We can push that to 100 and more. So can you explain a little bit of this topic?
I think you just did. I need to hire you and come coach for me.
I know.
No, yeah. So essentially there's well, glucose and fructose are simple sugars,
Simple
right?
sugars.
And so they're kind of under this umbrella term of carbohydrate, right? And so there's longer chain carbohydrates and there's shorter chain carbohydrates, meaning there's longer molecules or shorter molecules, right? And basically our body will break any type of carb down into those simple molecules. Okay. So pretty much any source of carb that you're going to have is going to get broken down into glucose and fructose, right? There's also galactose as well, but that's kind of a separate conversation. But most sports nutrition products are going to get when your body's breaking them down, it's going to break them down into glucose and fructose. Um, and there's a lot of different either natural or synthesized versions of those, like you mentioned, maltodextrin or cluster dextrin or dextrose or sucrose. And so there's a lot of different versions of those, but even all of those they'll get chopped up and basically turn it into glucose and fructose. Then when those are in our small intestine, so once they empty from our stomach into the small intestine and that's where they get taken into the bloodstream. Well, there's two different transporters that move those into the bloodstream. Okay. One of those is SGLT1, and that takes the glucose molecules in. And like you said, theoretically, on average, we can do about 1 gram of glucose a minute. We have enough of those transporters to move 1 gram of glucose into the bloodstream per minute, or in other words, 60 grams an hour, right? The fructose one is called GLUT5, and that one can move about a half a gram of fructose per minute, or in other words, 30 grams per hour. And so that's where you kind of get this 2-to-1 ratio. The 60 to 30 is that 2-to-1 ratio per hour, and then theoretically capping that at about 90 grams. Now, obviously, we see athletes do more than that, right? And so one theory is that the more we fuel with carbs, both in and out of training and racing, the more of those transporters that our body can make. So you can actually, and we need more research here, but
Yeah.
at least subjectively, we see that the more athletes get used to fueling with more, the better their body handles it and the more they can actually absorb
Oh, for
and
sure.
use. Um, and so there, you have athletes doing, especially cyclists, you have cyclists pushing 130, 140 grams sometimes. And it's like, oof, that's a lot. Like, are they actually using it? We don't really know, but they're at least absorbing it without, or eating that much without GI issues, right? Um, but yeah, and within, even 80, 90 grams an hour in running is phenomenal intake. Like
Yeah.
that's really quite high. Um, and so yeah, I usually try and help my athletes kind of find, first of all, you got to find a gel or a drink or both that you actually can tolerate in your mouth, right?
Exactly.
Because that's where people run into issues most of the time is they get palate fatigue and they stop wanting to take it in. Once it's in their
Just
stomach, it's like, great,
tolerance.
whatever. Yeah. But finding that and then something that they feel like they can absorb well and utilize and trying to maximize that number as much as we can within reason without causing GI issues. And that's kind of the goal as an
Yeah.
endurance athlete is eat as many grams of carbs as you can without causing GI issues.
Yeah. Well, thanks for explaining that because I think it's very important to understand this simple principle because, for example, if you're trying to take 90 grams per hour of a gel that only contains glucose, you're probably wasting 30 grams. Like you're not going to
Yeah.
absorb 30
Yeah.
grams that exceed
Well,
the 60-gram limit.
And and if you go over by too much, so let's say you're taking in too much glucose or too much fructose, lots of times you'll get GI issues
Yeah.
because of that, right? So not only you're not absorbing it, you're wasting it, but then if it keeps going in through the small intestine into the large intestine, and there's a bunch of carbs in there that are undigested, your body will actually pull fluid from your bloodstream
Hmm.
into the large intestine. So you'll become dehydrated and then you also might get diarrhea. So it's really not a good idea to go over what your body's capable of absorbing.
Yes. Awesome. What are your top tips for higher carbs fueling during trail races and increasing the
Yeah.
amount of carbs we get?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. First of all, practicing in your training is crucial because so many athletes they hear about this high carb fueling and then on their long runs they'll be doing 30 grams an hour and then it's like, well, it's race day, so I'm gonna do 90 grams today. And it's like, you're not ready for that. Like
Your
you're
body
gonna
doesn't know it's race day.
yeah, it doesn't know. And so practicing that in your long runs and in your speed sessions too, that's really important because that kind of mimics that intensity that you might have on race day, especially for, sub ultra, Golden Trail Series type races where you're like, you're going all out all race. Like you need to the body needs to be used to eating and digesting at those intensities if you're planning on doing that on race day. If you're not planning on doing that on race day, then whatever, right? You don't need to really practice it. But if you are, then you need to practice it. And then also just like we were talking about the potential of building more of those transporters, eating more carbs in your day-to-day nutrition.
Okay.
Um, and that can be anywhere from like 5 to 10 grams per kilogram per day, um, which is definitely more carbs than most athletes are probably eating.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, so often I have athletes come in and we'll do like a week of nutrition tracking or whatever, and we'll look at that. And on average, they're only getting 200, 300 grams of carbs, which again, that's not like low carb, but for an endurance athlete where you're constantly using your glycogen and then you want to build it back up so you can use it again the next day, uh, you run into issues if you're not eating that much. And then you're also not supporting the growth of those intestinal transporters too. So high carb fueling just in your normal day-to-day nutrition is really important too. And I would recommend in your normal daily eating, trying to mostly eat like whole food sources of carbs.
Hmm.
So lots of whole grains and legumes and fruits and veggies and things like that. And then that doesn't necessarily mean like, okay, so I'm just gonna go drink as much soda as I can, right? Like you also want to be supporting your overall nutrient intake too, right? And your vitamin and mineral intake with those healthy, more nutrient dense sources of carbs. But sometimes an athlete who is under fueling and needs to be eating a lot of carbs, like, okay, yeah, bring on the soda. Like if that's the way that you need to do it, like if it's either that or under fueling, like I'd rather you eat
Yeah, exactly.
junk food carbs,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, so
So
important because
yeah,
I see a lot of people obsessing over like the quality of food, but I
yeah,
think underfueling is probably worse than eating food that is not like top quality, like
for
considered
sure.
healthy food.
100%. 100%. And if we can do both, like that's even better, right? Eat
Yes,
enough and eat the right types of
healthy.
foods too.
Yes.
But sometimes that's not the case. So, but yeah, so practicing and training with your carb intake and then um and then eating enough carbs in your normal day to day is really important. And then just working on the actual logistics of like, okay, which
Hmm.
which gels do I actually like? Which drink mixes do I like? How much of those am I planning on doing? And kind of sorting that out as you're doing long runs in a training block or speed sessions in a training block and kind of figure out what works for you because everyone's a little bit different with what types of gels they like or how much of what or if they want to do the whole thing just on carb drinks, like that's also an option. Like it just works different for different athletes.
Yeah. Another aspect related to logistics, nutrition, especially during trail races that I found useful is that, the aid stations or feed zones rarely converge with our like hourly
With our
timing
hourly, yes. I wish they
of
did, but they just
nutrition.
don't.
So our strategy needs to take that into account, and we need to know exactly how much we need to take at each aid station in order to be okay for the next section of our race, because it's not like you have an aid station every hour. So,
Nope.
you have to work it out a little bit. And that's why nutrition planning
Yeah.
during on a trail race is like having a plan is key.
Yeah. There's kind of this transcription that needs to happen because, yeah, in training, we're usually practicing things hourly. So it's like how much fluid, how many
Exactly.
grams of carbs, how much caffeine, whatever it is, we're doing that hourly. But then at the race, maybe some of that can be hourly. Maybe if we're carrying all of our own gels, that can still be hourly on our own schedule, but you're not going to be able to refill or have two new flasks every hour magically, right? Like that doesn't
Exactly.
just happen. And so you need to transcribe that plan to become sectionally, basically by section. What am I getting through? When am I going to refill? That sort of thing. That's where all the spreadsheet fun comes into play, right?
Yeah.
When you're planning for a race.
Cool. A couple of more questions on this topic. Why it's important to quantify fuel by carbs per hour and not much by calories per hour?
Oh,
In
yeah.
other words, why are carbs like the number one nutrients for, I think, both long and short trail races? Because
Yeah.
a lot of people think, yeah, I'm running like long, like 100 Ks, 100 miles, but probably carbs are still going to be your primary source of fuel.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. Um, a lot of people, when you look it up, it's like, how much should I eat during my marathon or whatever? And it'll be like, oh, 200 to 300 calories, right? A lot of things are quantified in calories online. And traditionally, looking at that the old guard and how they used to do things of like, as get through with as little fueling as possible, whatever. That's the same, generation that would talk about things in terms of calories, right? And it's not necessarily wrong, right? But it's important to understand. So our bodies can use fuel from different places, right? And different macronutrients. So the macronutrients in our diet and in our fuel, that's what gives us energy. That's how our body makes ATP. So we can get energy from fat, from carbs, and from protein. Okay. Well, the way that our body stores those and what we're using at different intensities is really important to understand. Okay. So our body can store calories in the form of fat, a lot of that. We can store pretty much like
Unlimited.
indefinite amounts,
Yeah.
unlimited amounts of that, right? Like not not really, but like weeks worth of fat that our body can use as energy. Okay. Protein, our body doesn't really like to use that as energy. A little bit here and there, but protein is mostly used for rebuilding and regrowth and transport of things, and it has a lot of other jobs that doesn't necessarily involve energy. Okay. Carbs, our body really, really likes to use those during high intensity exercise and really any exercise, but especially high intensity exercise. Okay. The problem is we can only store a finite amount of carbohydrate and we store that as glycogen. So when you hear that word glycogen, it's just a fancy word for stored carbs, basically. And so that's the reason why when we're trying to quantify fueling during a race or during training in terms of carbs versus calories, I like to quantify it in terms of carbs because that's the macronutrient that we're concerned with replacing. Because if you think about it in terms of like if there's two gas tanks, so we're primarily using fat and carbs or glycogen during endurance activity. Let's just take a marathon, for instance. Okay. During that marathon, you're gonna slowly burn through that fat. Okay. It's like you could run several marathons before you're really even dipping into those fat stores. Okay. Whereas the glycogen, 2 hours into that marathon, if you're not fueling, that tank is empty, right? That's what bonking is. That's
Yeah.
running out of that glycogen is
Punk.
running is yeah, you're bonking. Um, and so that's the fuel source that we need to be replenishing. And so if someone's counting things in terms of calories, they're saying, okay, I need 200, 300 calories per hour or whatever. Well, you look at a Cliff Bar, for example, or like other protein bars or energy bars, right? A lot of those calories are going to be coming from fat or protein, which aren't macronutrients that we need to worry about replenishing. Again, if you look at that gas tank, it's you've got unlimited amounts of that. We don't have to worry about
Yeah. It's
replenishing
like
that in
constantly filled.
yeah, in most situations. Some ultra distance, Cocodona or something, that's a different conversation. Like where
Yeah.
we're talking about maybe, yeah,
But
you
even
are
for a
getting
hundred
some fat.
miler, like we're
But
not
yeah,
gonna
most
really.
most 100 milers, like, yeah, you just don't need to replenish that. And so yeah, but you look at a Cliff Bar, a lot of those calories aren't actually doing you any good. So if you're counting in terms of calories, it's like you're not actually, you might be under fueling, essentially. You might not be getting what you actually need to be getting in. Luckily, most sports nutrition products are mostly carbohydrate anyways, because the people that are making them know that that's the thing that we need. And so whether you're counting it in terms of calories or carbs, it doesn't really matter. But, if we're trying to properly educate athletes and say, okay, what is your body actually using up and needing? It's carbs, not this overall blanket term of calories. Hopefully that makes sense.
Oh yeah, yeah. Great, great explanation. And last question on the topic is why does this amount of carbs per hour like we didn't mention like the gender or body size or
Oh,
body
yep.
weight. And why
Yeah.
does it not depend much on those things?
So depending on your body size, you can store different amounts of glycogen, right? We store those stored carbs in our muscle. And so someone with more muscle can theoretically store more glycogen. But in order to power those muscles, they're going to need more glycogen, right? And so it kind of goes up and down with our body size. If you're a bigger person, you're probably going to be able to store more, but you also need more, right? Smaller person, you're probably going to be able to store less, but you also probably don't need quite as much either, right? And so really it's kind of an individual basis sort of thing where storing carbs, we're looking at that daily intake of anywhere from 5 to 10 grams per kilogram per day or something like that, depending on training volume. But then if we're looking at their actual training sessions or racing and what you need, um, we're aiming from anywhere from I'm trying to help most of my athletes get above 60 grams an
Yeah.
hour. Usually you can do that pretty comfortably without having gastrointestinal issues. Um, and then the higher intensity they're planning on going, especially athletes at the pro level who are going to be able to put out really high outputs for a long time, they're the ones who benefit from more. And so kind of finding an athlete where their goals are and how high of an intensity they're able to maintain, that kind of helps us gauge where on that like 60 to 90 plus grams of carbs per hour they should be.
Awesome. Well, thanks. I think that's enough for what I wanted to ask you today. I think we will come back with another episode next time. So it's not like too much information to digest. And
Perfect.
yeah, thanks for joining us today. And I hope our audience found the conversation useful.
Of course. It was fun.
Cool.
Sweet.
Yeah, that was good. Pretty long, but good. Do you have time
Yeah.
for
Let's see, what time is it? Yeah, I'm good. If you want to keep going, I'm good.
I think the next like we basically covered two topics of what I wanted to do, but
There's
and
so much
there's
to
two
there's
more.
there's so
Um
much to unpack. There's always
yeah.
you can go so deep. It's fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm good to keep going if you want to.
Okay. Yeah, I briefly wanted to touch on nutrients in daily nutrition and like for example understanding what you really need through blood work that you mentioned before.
Okay, yeah,
And then some of like the GI issue topic and
great.
how to
Figure
better
that out.
manage that.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Vic Johnson, welcome back for our second episode about nutrition on the Running Alone podcast.
Thanks, Francesco. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So we're gonna continue the conversation that we had the other time. Obviously, we're not gonna like talk about everything, and like the nutrition topic is huge, and there is so much to talk about. But the idea with this conversation is to just give people some practical information and tips on nutrition to like better manage their daily nutrition and um, when it comes to approaching, long distance endurance events like trail races. We covered two main topics. Basically, one is making sure we're eating enough in our daily nutrition, which is probably the number one thing that we should think about related to the nutrition topic. And the second one, sorry, the second one is fueling during the endurance exercise. And we talked about the carbs revolution and how athletes are really pushing to a pretty big amount of carbohydrates per hour during the endurance exercise. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit more in detail about the nutrients in our daily nutrition. Last time you mentioned that we can understand a lot of what we need through blood work. So I wanted to get more into that topic. And we're going to talk about GI issues during trail races, which is maybe another common reason why athletes typically decide to seek your help
Hmm.
and come to work with you. Um, so on the nutrients in your daily nutrition topic, how would you start to approach this problem, and how do you maybe identify some gaps where we need to do something or like change some of our habits?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, well, there's more subjective ways that we can figure things out, and there's more objective ways that we can figure things out. And I like to kind of use a combination of both, where, if I'm checking in with an athlete frequently and they're telling me how they're feeling and how their training's going and how they're recovering, that gives in general that can give you a pretty good sense of like, okay, this athlete's probably eating enough, they're probably getting the right types of things in. If an athlete's like, okay, I feel super sluggish all the time, heavy legs on every run, um, you know, shouldn't be feeling this way because, maybe they've been training really well and they're doing everything else really good. That maybe says to me, oh, maybe we should look at iron, right? Like maybe iron's an issue. So there's kind of some of that subjectivity that's really important, probably probably even more important than the objective side of things. Because at the end of the day,
Mhm.
it's like how you feel is the most important thing, right? And so we want to be paying attention to that. Um, but then on the objective side, there's kind of two things that we can do. You mentioned blood work, and that's super important. But usually, even before blood work, I'll have the athlete track for a week or two on a food tracking app, and that can help us identify at least theoretically with their food intake, okay, are you getting enough of this stuff? And then if we're doing blood work as well, we kind of have both of those reference points, and we can say, okay, yeah, maybe it says you're getting enough iron in your daily nutrition. Maybe you're getting the recommended 18 milligrams or whatever you should be getting. Um, but then we look at your blood work and your ferritin's low. That's like, okay, well, you're probably not absorbing all of that iron. And then we can start changing things and shifting things and the timing and the dosage and that sort of thing to make sure it's optimized for that athlete. So kind of having like you need to have a baseline and so
Mhm.
getting the blood work
Yeah.
and doing some of the tracking, that's kind of establishing that baseline, and then we can intervene, you know, make an intervention, and then hopefully we're doing more testing in 2 or 3 months to see if that intervention is actually causing changes. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. I think, yeah, a lot of times we're as athletes like we're lazy on this aspect, and like, doing consistent blood work and tracking those things is, yeah, maybe not the number one priorities for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I guess we like it's worth the effort. Identifying like, yeah, first is asking ourselves how do we feel and paying attention to that. And second is like reflecting on some actual data that can come from blood work to help
Yeah.
making informed decision and maybe change strategies around nutrition and training.
Yeah, I know a lot of the time it's kind of funny because I'll suggest an athlete gets frequent blood work and they're like, well, but then my next training session won't be as good because they're taking all this blood out of me, and it's like, yeah, maybe acutely you won't feel quite as good, but like in the long term
It doesn't
it's not
matter.
going to matter, and it's so much better like that we have the data and we can actually look at that. So yeah, there's, whether you're working with like your primary care provider or whatever and getting those draws through insurance or another means. Or there's great companies online like Athlete Blood Test. that a lot of my athletes use, and they have really quick turnaround times. You can customize the panels and that sort of thing. So, yeah, depending on what the athlete needs, we can get blood draws every 2 months if we need to, and it can be really quite helpful.
Yeah. From a nutrition standpoint, what are the most significant things to look at? For sure, I know, I mean, you mentioned iron
Yeah.
because it's involved with the oxygen transportation. Vitamin D, of course, is very important for bone health, muscle strength, and probably immune functions.
Yeah.
What else would you mention?
Um, a lot of athletes are low in B12 and folate, which
Mhm.
are also very important to build those new red blood cells, right? So a lot of the adaptations that you're making as an endurance athlete is you have this high turnover rate with red blood cells. And so you want to make sure the new ones that you're building are in the right amount and the right size and the right shape. And vitamin B12 and folate both are really crucial for that. And so making sure that those are optimized and kind of regardless of diet, like so many athletes, like regardless of whether they're ketogenic or vegan, it doesn't really matter. Like everyone's low in B12. And so not everyone, but so many athletes are. And so I always recommend testing that. And that's usually not on well, it kind of depends on the panel, but a lot of times that's not just on routine checkups. And a lot of these aren't. Like a lot of times like your doctor won't when you're doing your routine blood work, they won't look at a full iron panel. They won't look at vitamin D. They won't look at B12. They won't look at folate. You have to specifically ask for those. And so if you're going in to do routine blood work, ask your doctor. You might have to pay a little bit extra, but ask them if they can run those tests too, because those are the things that are so directly correlated with the foods that we're eating and how much we're eating.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing that just came to my mind that maybe can guide or, yeah, influence or change our decision regarding nutrition and hydration in our daily life is um, knowing like our overall sweat rate and
Hmm.
sodium sweat concentration and all that topic which is related to hydration and I think is very important when it comes to performance. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about sweat tests and how and when should we do them and maybe like factors that influence our sweat rate and how they change with different conditions and how do we make sure we replenish the
Yeah.
nutrients, like the not the nutrients, the yeah, vitamins and minerals that we lose through
Yeah.
sweat with nutrition and hydration.
Yeah. You just opened up a whole can of worms, but it's a fun topic. Um, so yeah, but essentially when you're sweating, you're losing fluid through that sweat, right? And your body's cooling itself. That's why you're sweating in the first place. Um, and so it is really important to understand how much to take in, right? And there are kind of similar with carbohydrate, like there's general recommendations, right? Which, if you look at like the International Olympic Committee statement on nutrition for endurance sports, it's like 300 to 800 milliliters of fluid per hour. But obviously, like that's a huge range.
Yeah.
And that's a very general recommendation, right? That might be too much for someone, that might be too little. Like it depends on the event. So, like you said, there's all of these variables that will affect how much you should be drinking. Um, Similar to the other topics that we've talked about, there's kind of the subjectivity that goes into it. It's like, well, how did you feel? Did you have to pee a lot? Were you feeling good? Were you feeling nauseated? Like, you feel like your body was regulating your temperature okay? Like, those are some important questions to ask. But then there is more of the objective side of things too, where we can do some sweat rate testing. We can do sodium rate, see how much sodium you're losing per liter of fluid. Um, And there's a few different ways we can do that, but I usually try it to help my athletes do some sweat rate testing. And that can even be as simple as doing that at home, just weighing yourself before a session and post session and seeing how much you lost over the course of that training session. It's also important to keep track of how much you've eaten or drunk during that session and how much if you do pee, you can measure that too, which gets a
Yeah.
little more complicated. But the more exact you can be, the better you'll be able to trust that sweat rate. Now, it's important to note that with that sweat rate testing, it's going to change based on a lot of different variables. So
Yes.
temperature and humidity are probably the biggest ones. Um, but also like your hydration status going into the run can affect your sweat rate quite a bit.
Intensity
Um,
for sure.
Intensity, yes, exactly. Your intensity, the duration, um, even things like elevation and altitude can
Hmm.
affect overall sweat rate. And so trying to do as many of those as you can over the course of a training block in conditions that are going to be similar to the race, which is really hard to do. Like I've got a lot of athletes that are training in Colorado right now who are then gonna go over and race in Mallorca coming up, and it's like, how do they like the temperatures in Colorado are gonna be cold, and so their sweat rate's gonna read really low, but then when they get to Mallorca, like it's gonna be hot and humid, so it's like, what is that gonna do to their sweat rate? So it can be a little bit tricky. And so, but the more data we can collect, the better. And then we're kind of able to look at that, all of that data together and say, okay, well, the race is going to be these conditions. This has been your sweat rate in conditions as similar to that as possible. So this is roughly how much we should be drinking, right? And that, let's say you are losing a liter an hour. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should aim to drink a liter an hour. That gets a little bit
Yeah.
more complex, but it gives us an idea, like a starting point of like where to start with our hydration strategy. Um, and then same with sodium and electrolyte losses. Now, sodium's the one that we usually focus on because that's the one that we lose the most of, and that's the one that tends to have the biggest influence on our fluid balance in our body and where that water's going, whether that's in our cells or out of our cells. And so if we lose too much sodium, then we can run into issues, right? And so having some of that sweat sodium rate testing can be really helpful too. Um, but to be honest, a lot of athletes go straight to that, and a lot of the tests out there are only for the sodium, and they're not actually even looking at the overall sweat rate. And that's it's less important. The
Mhm.
overall sweat rate is way more important than the amount of
Okay.
sodium that you're losing. And so if you're only going to do one piece
So,
of testing, do the overall sweat rate
okay.
testing.
So basically, like how much you drink during the exercise is more important than what you drink, or whether you're
Then how
taking
much
like
sodium.
salt tablets or not.
Yeah, well, and really, yeah, it's kind of been blown out of proportion
Mm.
in the media, and a lot of marketing is behind electrolyte supplementation,
Yeah.
as you can imagine. And it's not to say that it's not important. It is important to get enough, but most of us are just eating so much sodium in our normal everyday diets, and our bodies can store that. And
Okay.
so even if we're out there sweating for a couple hours, our body's taking care of that on its own, even without
Okay.
taking that in. I usually tell my athletes if they're going over like 3 or 4 hours, then maybe we do purposefully take in some sodium,
Okay.
and have an actual sodium replenishment plan, almost like an insurance policy, just to make sure that we're not going to underdo it. But for the most part, people are pretty good if they're just, drinking enough
Yeah.
fluid in general. Most of the issues are going to, like cramping, for example, that's usually that's just an underhydrating issue. That it's usually not related to like our sodium balance. If the sodium balance is super out of whack, sure, that can
Yeah.
affect it. But usually it's just an underhydrating issue. Um, so yeah,
I
there's
think
some
it's
some misconceptions there, I think,
yes.
with sodium intake.
I think it's important to understand that there are some priorities uh, on things that we should make sure they're dialed in before others. And
Yeah,
overall hydration is more important than sodium sweat concentration and all of that.
yeah,
So before thinking about that, it's more important to make sure that other things are dialed in.
yeah,
Um, and then, yeah, the other related question that I had is, are there any counter consequences of like taking too much sodium, for example? Like some people are used to taking, salt tablets or electrolytes in most of their long runs or races. Could it be too much? Or like when is it better not to take
yeah.
electrolytes and sodium?
It can be, and one of the reasons why. Well, let me back this up by saying so. It, most of your sports nutrition products, gels, sports drinks, they're gonna have some sodium in them, and that's okay. Like that. That usually, if you're just doing what they're recommended, like per scoop or per bottle or whatever, like it's probably not gonna be too much, right? It's probably gonna be okay. Um, But one of the reasons why I have athletes do the overall sweat rate testing first and figure out how much fluid we're replenishing is because based on that, that can help us know how much sodium we need to, like how much sodium we can take in because basically you need the right ratio of fluid to sodium. If you're getting if you're taking in way too much sodium and not enough fluid, that can throw off your plasma balance of
Mm,
sodium and fluid in your plasma in your bloodstream. And that can cause all of the same issues as having too little sodium, right? So it can throw things
yeah.
off in the opposite direction. So whether that's nausea or vomiting or cramping or it can throw off those electrical balances as well in your muscles and so that's usually why I like to look at overall fluid. Then based on that, we can kind of have a sodium plan too. But honestly, the biggest thing, and this might even kind of lead into some of those GI issues, but the biggest thing that I usually see is athletes take in too much sodium, and that can cause, like with not enough water, that can cause slow gastric emptying, meaning
Mm.
the stuff in your stomach is just hanging out in your stomach. And we don't want that, right?
Yeah.
Or or it goes through and there's a lot of sodium in your intestines, and again, it's pulling fluid out from your bloodstream into the intestines to kind of balance that out, and so you're becoming dehydrated. And so both of those things can cause nausea. They can cause, gas and bloating and discomfort on a gastrointestinal level. And so that's the issue that I usually see. And so many times it's really sad because a lot of athletes think, oh, I'm having GI issues, I'm having stomach issues. It's got to be the sodium, so I'm going to take more. Like I'm not taking enough electrolytes. And so they're just adding electrolytes to the problem that they're already are probably caused by too much electrolytes in the first place. And so, yeah, that can be an important lesson to learn as an endurance athlete for sure.
Okay, so let's transition to the GI issue topic. So
Okay.
nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and all of those nasty problems that sometimes we experience during a trail race or an endurance effort. Um, of course, usually the longer the race, the activity, the more we're gonna have those kind of issues because nutrition plays a bigger role in
Mhm.
the performance, and you're just out there for more hours. So the likelihood increases.
Yeah.
Um, what are some like best practices and top tips for managing those issues besides, common sense? So like, practice your nutrition strategy and like avoid like the most common mistakes and all of that.
Yeah. I would say that I don't have a percentage, but the majority of gastrointestinal issues during running specifically comes from slow gastric emptying.
Yeah.
Okay. So And there's a few different things that can lead to slow gastric emptying. The predominant issue is there's a during exercise there's a lack of blood flow to the stomach and the intestines. And those are smooth muscles, they're muscles, and so they contract just like our other muscles do, right? And so they kind of move things along. But if there's no good blood flow there, there's not going to be those same contractions. And so stuff just kind of slows down, or sometimes it can stop completely. And the higher intensity we go, the longer duration we go, that tends to pull because all of our blood is going out to peripheral muscles
Yep.
to bring oxygen and oxygenate those working muscles. That's why there's kind of this lack. And so that's there's not a whole lot you can do about that, right? And some people are more just genetically predisposed to less blood flow to the GI system. Now, if you're underhydrated, that can make things way worse
Mm.
too, right? In that regard, because if your blood volume is too low or your blood's kind of sludgy or thick because you're dehydrated, then there's going to be even less blood flow to the gut, right? And so that's something that you can kind of focus on is that hydration piece. Um, but the things that are controllable that cause slow gastric emptying are one, what you're eating before that run or before the race really can make or break. I'm sure you've experienced that where you ate too much or you ate the wrong type of food before and you can feel it, right? That you can feel it just sitting in your gut and not digesting well, and it's just hanging out there causing issues. Usually the perpetrators of that are fat, fiber, and protein. Usually those are the things that can kind of slow things down the most. And so I'll help my athletes understand that before their races, and the timing is a little bit different for everyone, but the day before a big race, like really back off on fat, fiber, and protein. Like you should be carb loading anyway. You should be focusing on mostly carbs anyway. And so kind of getting rid of some of those slower digesting foods can kind of minimize that risk that you're going to have slow gastric emptying during the race. So that's really important. And then of course avoiding those foods during the event, kind of like we were talking about before, um, where you're not going to be having a lot of fat or fiber or protein during most events. Sometimes there's exceptions to that rule, but most of the time. Um, so those can cause slow gastric emptying. A third thing that can cause slow gastric emptying is basically if the concentration of carbohydrate or sodium, electrolytes becomes too high in your stomach, it will basically cause all of that to slow down and not empty into the small intestine. And so you kind of get two problems there. Not only are you causing distension in your stomach and maybe some sloshing and nausea that can come from that feeling of like fullness, um, you're also not getting the fluid and the carbs to where it can get absorbed into the bloodstream. And so you might have all this stuff in your stomach and be bonking at the same time. Like you're having these
Yeah.
GI issues and bonking at the same time because you're just not getting what you need.
Yeah, I think
Um,
this is a very typical situation for a lot of people,
yeah,
especially after a number of hours. Like you experience nausea, you don't like your body doesn't accept food anymore, doesn't accept
yep,
gels. Like typically is related to gels because they're so sweet.
yeah,
And yeah, that's a problem of all sports nutrition, I guess. But I mean, there are, of course, better products than others. So yeah, I mean, you can choose what you like and what sits well in your stomach, but I think it's a very common issue among athletes.
yeah, yeah. And like to your point, there does become a point if someone is experiencing slow gastric emptying and their whole digestive system has just kind of slowed down or
Wow.
shut down, that can actually kind of send signals back up the chain to where you don't want to like your body's basically telling you, hey, don't send anything else down here.
Mm.
Like we don't want any more gels. We don't want any more sports drink because
So
we're
should we
already
stop?
struggling.
Should we stop
Yeah.
eating?
So the biggest thing that's going to help with that high concentration is by diluting that, right? So
Mm,
making sure that your fluid intake is adequate is going to
okay.
be huge, right? So if someone has this really lofty carb goal and they're like, "Hey, I want to do 100 grams an hour," it's like, okay, we got to make sure your hydration is on point too, because if not, you're going to be taking in a super concentrated drink mix or 3 gels an hour, and without enough fluid, that's probably going to be pretty slow digest, right? Um, and so that's what we usually try to make sure goes hand in hand with high carb fueling is the hydration piece. But if you're out there and it's already happening, like you're trying to troubleshoot, during a race, then I would definitely say, yeah, you're not going to want to hear this, but like slowing down, and you might be forced to slow down anyway because you feel
Yeah.
like that. But slowing down, that's going to bring some more blood flow back to the gut, which is good, right? And then yeah, drinking plain water for a little while. And usually that's a little more palatable, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're super tired of the sweet gels and drinks, like you might want some more water, and just kind of sip on that water until you feel like things are kind of moving again, and gastric emptying happened, or maybe you threw it up and so you're empty that way too. Like that might be part of what happens too. But then hopefully you can kind of slowly get back into that plan and start hydrating a little bit more as you continue fueling, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Could like eating something salty or just different from what you were taking help, or is maybe better not to in that
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah. I mean, if you can feel like it's a true gastric emptying issue, then you probably don't want to add more food to that mix. Like just
Obviously.
back off on fueling entirely. But if it's just a palate fatigue issue where once things are in your stomach, you feel like they're digesting okay, it's just getting them, past your
Getting them
throat.
down.
That's
Yeah.
yeah, like if you could magically just have a bunch of gels in your stomach, you'd be fine. Um, then yeah, switching up like from sweet to savory, super helpful, right? Like the different sensation, and you're telling your nervous system like, oh, this is different. Like it's kind of a reset, right? And that can really help. Or even, for athletes who are doing longer races, lots of times I'll suggest even changing the brand or the flavor of their
Yeah.
sports drink halfway through the race just to mix it up, just to give themselves something different, a different
Yeah,
flavor.
taste fatigue is a
It's
thing for
huge.
sure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So yeah, but yeah, savory foods can be a really nice reset. Now, they aren't usually quite as convenient to fuel with,
Hmm.
but kind of a good reset now and again can be nice.
Yes. Couple of more questions before we close off. One is related to the topic that we just mentioned. So, yeah, nutrition during races and GI issues. Um, the science is pretty clear that caffeine is a performance enhancer. So it can truly be super helpful for athletes
Yeah, big
during
time.
both long and short events. So my question is very simple. How and when should we use caffeine during trail races? And how much should we take? And just any practical tips that you may have.
Yeah. I think understanding the potential downsides of too much caffeine is important.
Exactly. That's why
So that
it's
you're able,
related to GI issues.
yeah, so that you're able to kind of recognize those in training and know like, oh, well, that was too much, too fast or whatever. And that's usually going to show up as nausea. Um, and sometimes you can get, irregular heartbeat or higher heart rate because of that caffeine intake if it's pretty high. But most of the time I see that manifested as nausea. And so in the literature, the recommendations are anywhere from about 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. Now, that's not per hour per se. Um,
Yeah, like how
because
long does it last?
yeah, it depends. And I know
Depends.
that's like a sucky answer to get. Like, oh, it depends, right? But it's a nutritionist's favorite answer to give because it really does. But
That's
I would
been
say
one of my
most,
doubts for sure. Like, okay,
okay,
I
yeah, like
might
how
take,
long?
yeah, I might take that amount in the first, 3 hours of my race, but then what about the next 3 hours? I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. So I've found that with most athletes, so well, how caffeine works, you kind of have like this bell curve, right,
Mhm.
of effect. So you take it, and then it depends on the athlete, depends on the form of caffeine, but usually that'll like peak in the bloodstream like 20 to 40 minutes
Okay.
after taking it. Sometimes it can be a little bit quicker too if they have quick gastric emptying or whatever, but even in our mouth and in our stomach, our body can start to absorb some of that caffeine,
Yes.
whereas, the carbs and the fluids aren't that way. Um, so peaks and then kind of stays high for a while, and then it'll kind of slowly drop off. That whole curve usually is like 2 or 3 hours
Okay.
ish. And I say ish because again, it's different for every athlete. But so usually what I'll recommend is someone's like just kind of starting out experimenting to have like an actual caffeine protocol, like during long runs or during races. Um, I'll usually tell them, okay, let's aim for the lower end of that range if we're looking at like the 3 to 6 milligrams per kilo. So for, I don't know, 70 kilo athlete, like that's, I don't know, their minimum would be like 200 something, their maximum
Yeah.
would be like 500 something, right?
Yep.
Um, I would say let's start on the lower end of that range. And that might look like one 75 milligram or 100 milligram caffeinated gel per hour,
Okay.
depending on because then what happens is you kind of get these bell curves that are starting and kind of overlapping. And so you can hopefully kind of ride that high,
Hmm.
right? Um, Now, for a shorter race, so I would say anything under, I don't know, 6, 7 hours. Like if you've trained with it, yeah, because to your point, like caffeine works, like it
Yeah.
really does help. And I think most people are underdoing it, actually. They're not taking the dosage that is actually going to make a difference. Like they're not within that 3 to 6 milligram range for the most part. Um, but yeah, if you've shown in training that you don't seem to have GI issues, right? Or with that, and you're hydrating well and you're getting the carbs that you need, because again, those are more important than this caffeine thing. But once you're doing those, and we can see that, okay, caffeine would kind of be this extra cherry on top, like why not go for it? Then I would say anything less than about 6 or 7 hours, let's try and do the whole thing caffeinated, right?
Yep.
Um, if it's a longer race, 100 miles or even some 100 Ks or whatever, usually I'll have my athletes start about halfway through,
Okay.
just to minimize the risk of GI issues. If they're doing, if you're taking in that much caffeine for 13 hours straight, it's like, you might you might run into issues, right? But where it's a shorter race, you can be a little bit more aggressive, and start from the gun. Like even the gel that you're having 20 minutes before the start, like have that be a caffeinated gel, and then every hour I would just have one of your gels be a
Okay.
caffeinated gel.
Good.
But again, it depends on body weight and kind of what the athlete's able to tolerate and what that how long that wave is lasting for the athlete. But I would say on average, I would guess that that's about an hour and a half to 3 hours, depending on the athlete. Um, Hopefully that helps
Oh
answer
yeah,
that
super
question.
helpful. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I was thinking I usually take gels that have 100 milligrams of caffeine.
Yeah.
So if you
What
consider
what's
that,
your what's your go-to caffeinated gel? Like what brand?
Enervit is my
Oh,
nutrition
nice. Yeah,
sponsor.
yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot
So
of
they
people
make
like those.
like this really nice 40 grams gels that have a 2-to-1 ratio glucose and
It's
fructose,
great.
and I
Yeah,
can choose without caffeine or with caffeine. So like if I take
it's
one
perfect.
every hour for a 5 to 6 hour race, I think I can ride that high wave
Oh
of
yeah.
the bell curve
Well, yeah,
that
because
helps
let's
me
just, I don't know if you want to do this live, but let's just do some math real quick. Like how many kilos do you weigh roughly if you're
like
comfortable saying
60
that?
kilos. So for me, that would be
Okay.
300 to
So
600.
180, yeah, 180 milligrams.
Oh yeah, sorry,
Ev
180
yeah,
to
180 to
360.
3 to yeah, to 360 um over the course of 2 hours. So yeah, I mean if you were doing 100 milligram gel every hour, I would think you would see effects there. And if you aren't, maybe we bump that up to
Yeah,
2 an hour. I mean that might be a
because
little
I
bit much, or maybe 1.5. I don't know.
because from what I understand, if I take another caffeine gel at the fourth hour, I'm basically the effect of the gel that I took at the first hour,
Yeah.
like you replenish that
Yeah,
effect.
you're always like riding the wave of the
Exactly.
previous gel. Yeah.
So it kind of
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, and yeah,
Well,
that's where I would start at least. And then again, it's going to be a lot of subjective, you know, troubleshooting of like, okay, that was too much, that was too little, I felt weird,
yeah, I must say so
whatever.
far it's worked. So
But yeah, yeah, I
that's
mean, it
probably
sounds like
good.
that's a pretty solid plan
Well, thanks for the tip.
there. I'll be billing you later. No, just kidding.
Okay, so one final question that is maybe more like a comment um about the approach that a lot of athletes have to nutrition in general. And I want to bring an example because I think some facts about nutrition come like in waves, and sometimes we obsess over the latest trend and what's hot and looks great on Instagram and looks like professional. And I think one example of that are ketones, because I see many athletes whose nutrition sucks or like it's not very good. But then they think that by getting ketones or whatever other superfood or substance, they're like magically ahead of everyone else, and they're feeling okay about what they do.
100%.
But like in reality, they're just feeding their sense of confidence in what they do, but not like actually doing something useful for themselves. It's like
Yeah,
pretending one single workout is going to change the quality of your preparation
exactly.
if like your training plan sucks.
Yeah.
So what's your I mean, I'm not necessarily asking your opinion on ketones, but how do you see this approach that a lot of people have, and that has a lot to
Yeah.
do with what they see on Instagram or what's
Oh
available
yeah.
online and stuff?
Yeah, and ketones are a great example because it is kind of the latest and greatest like hot new trend.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of times I'll present it to my athletes like this, where I'm sure you're familiar with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like
Yeah.
the the triangle with like different needs that we have, right? And there's a similar concept with nutrition, right? And especially as an athlete, where maybe on the bottom of that pyramid, we have eating enough, okay? And then we have eating the right types of foods, making sure we're getting the right nutrients. And then we have fueling workouts and recovery nutrition, right? Making sure that you are, hitting your grams per hour and your hydration and all that fun stuff. And then at the very tippy top, then we have like our supplement, we have our caffeine, we have our ketones, we have sodium bicarb, right? Like there's a bajillion different things that we can look at, or supplements, or things that are getting marketing, uh, a lot of eyes on them because of their marketing. Some of those are more researched than others, right? So, for example, I would still put caffeine in the top of that as like one of the last things we should be paying attention to. But there's really good research behind it. It's like,
Yes,
yeah, if an athlete can do that,
that
we
works.
definitely should be doing it. It works. Whereas some of these other ones, especially newer ones like ketones, we still don't have a whole ton of research showing that, like, in good consciousness, as a practitioner, I can't be like, yeah, you should be taking those. Whereas with caffeine, it's like, yes, you should be taking that, if as long as you're healthy and don't have issues with taking it. But like a lot of those sorts of supplements and like the shiny new objects that are getting a lot of marketing money, they're just that. Like we don't have the research. And maybe
Should
a
be
year or two
aware of
from
that.
now, yeah, and a year or two from now, maybe we'll have some solid research on ketones for endurance athletes, and it's like, oh, whoa, like this actually does make a huge difference. It's not just the subjective data that we've been hearing from some people. It's like really real data. It's like, okay, then we start working that into our recommendations. But until we have that, like let's focus on these things that we actually do know
Nail
help.
the basics. Yeah, I think is
Exactly.
the bottom line. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if your general nutrition sucks, it's not the ketone or like the bicarb that is gonna make a difference for your training
Yeah.
or races. It's just
Yeah.
like, if your mileage is not there, it's not like by taking that supplement or like wearing Normatec after your workouts is gonna make that much of a difference.
Exactly. And
So,
lots of times those basics aren't as sexy, right? Like,
yeah.
oh, make sure you're eating enough. That's boring. No one wants to meal prep. No one wants to like make a shopping list and go get the food they need, right? It's boring and it's not sexy and there's not a lot of advertising behind that. But that's the
It's a
thing
lot
that
of
is good.
work too.
It's a lot of work. Yeah, you base miles, going out and doing your hour and 20-minute run on the roads.
Slow.
You're not doing speed. You're alone. You're not on the cool trails, whatever. You're not taking Instagram shots. Like it's boring. But that's going to be 80% of your training. And that's what actually is going to make the difference, right? That like when you show up on race day, that's the thing that you have, that's the hay in the barn, so to speak, that is actually going to get you to that finish line fast. So nutrition is the exact same.
Awesome. I think it's good bottom line to close our conversation. Thank you. It's been super interesting and hopefully helpful. At least it's been for me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me. I've had a blast.
Thanks.